Over Cunningham. Di Canio! Oh, I do not believe that! That is sensational! Even by his standards.
Paolo Di Canio. This guy wasn't your everyday footballer. He was a bit of a character, a one-man show on the park. We are talking in excess of 500 league appearances, over 100-odd goals, and a temper to make any teapot blush. When he had the ball at his feet, Di Canio was a maestro, one of those who could pull out some pure brilliance to leave you gobsmacked. But at the same time, he had a way of getting himself into a right pickle, whether with the ref, the opposition, or even with his own teammates. However, it was his open political views that got him into the most amount of trouble. Well, Di Canio's tale started right in the middle of Rome, in a quarter called Quarticciolo, a right working class area full of Roma fans. But young Paolo, well, he had a mind of his own. He was drawn to their rivals, Lazio, like a moth to a flame. A young lad who liked a glass of pop or two, they nicknamed him Palocca, which is a literal translation for a fat little boy. He was on the heavy side, knock-kneed, and even had to wear special shoes. But did that hold him back in any way? Not one little bit. Di Canio signed for Lazio in 1985, and that's where he really cut his teeth. They were a bit up and down, mind you. One minute they're narrowly dodging relegation to Serie C1, the next they're getting promoted to Serie A. But through it all, Paolo was there, learning his trade and waiting for his chance. He started with Lazio and ended his career with Lazio. Well, at least his political views did. But what was so upsetting about them in the first place? Hold your pints, because this one is a serious story. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, back to the video. That opportunity arrived in 1988, and boy did he grab it with both hands. 30 games in his debut season, and a winner in the Rome derby to boot. Talk of making an entrance. That goal alone made him a hero to the Lazio faithful. But, as often is the case in football, greener pastures beckoned. In 1990, he was off to Juventus, one of the biggest clubs in Italy. Now, they won the UEFA Cup in '93, but with the likes of Baggio, Vialli and Ravanelli in the squad, Di Canio found himself warming the bench more often than not. After a bit of a Barney with the manager Trapattoni, he was off again, this time to Napoli for the 1993-94 season. Then it was on to AC Milan, where he won the Serie A title in '96. But again, competition for places was fierce, and another row, this time with Capello, signalled the end of his time there. So where do hotheads like Di Canio go to? To the UK, of course, and that's where he was headed to anyway. After all the Italian melodrama, Di Canio fancied a change of scenery. In July 1996, he packed his bags and headed north to Scotland, signing for Celtic. Now his first season was a belter, 15 goals in 37 appearances, and he even bagged the SPFA Player of the Year award. The boys were loving him, and he seemed to be loving life in Glasgow. But, as we know with Paolo, controversy was never too far away. He got sent off in a match against Hearts, and then there was that infamous Old Firm confrontation with Rangers back in March '97. And to put the cherry on top, at the end of the season, he demands an immense pay rise that Celtic aren't particularly pleased about. So, what does Paolo do? He refuses to go on a pre-season training camp in the Netherlands with the squad. Di Canio was off to pastures new again, this time to head down south to Sheffield Wednesday of the English Premier League. A cool £4.2 million they paid for him, mind you. Well, Di Canio being Di Canio, he didn't waste much time in making an impact. He finished the 1997-98 season as top scorer for the Owls with 14 goals, and the fans simply loved him. He was their new hero, their Italian stallion. Then along came that infamous match with Arsenal back in September '98. Vieira and Jonk were going at each other a bit, and Di Canio, always the protector, stepped in to defend his teammate. The next thing you know, he's shoving Vieira, Keown's getting involved, and it all kicks off. Meanwhile, Keown's elbow catches Di Canio, and he reacts by lashing out. Red card, obviously. But Di Canio, being Di Canio, doesn't just walk off. Oh no, he pushes the referee to the ground. What's next? An 11-game ban, a £10,000 fine, and a whole lot of headlines. That Arsenal game, the final whistle blew. Di Canio was furious. The ref was probably still dusting himself off, and the whole stadium buzzing like a beehive. Di Canio then stormed to the dressing room, still fuming. Then, out of all the chaos, one of the backroom staff at Sheffield Wednesday pulled him aside and whispered, "Run away to Italy." January 1999, and Di Canio was back in action as he signed for West Ham United for a cool £1.5 million. He was just happy to be given the opportunity, knowing full well he had let everyone down and that this was his chance to make amends. It did not take him long either. On his fourth game, he scored his first goal for the Hammers, laying one on a plate for Ian Pearce before smashing one in himself against Blackburn Rovers. He helped West Ham finish fifth that season, even qualifying for the UEFA Cup through the Intertoto Cup. The bloke was on fire. He even won the Opta Player of the Season award. But incredibly, the best was yet to come. In March 2000, he scored that goal against Wimbledon, a flying volley, pure poetry in motion. It was voted the BBC goal of the season, and some even reckon it's the best goal in Premier League history. No wonder the West Ham fans voted him Hammer of the Year. December 2000, tight game against Everton, both sides needing the win. Di Canio's is presented with a gilt-edged chance, and here's the ball across the box, and the keeper is down injured. But instead of smashing it into the back of the net, he does the unthinkable. He catches the ball, stops play so the keeper can get treatment. The whole of Goodison Park erupted in applause. Even the Everton fans were on their feet, cheering for the bloke who'd just denied his own team a goal. He received accolades from FIFA for his sportsmanlike conduct, termed as a special act. The following year, he was given the Fair Play Award, the same bloke who'd once pushed a referee. Talk about a turnaround. By 2003, things were starting to look a bit grim for West Ham. They were languishing at the bottom of the table, and Di Canio, never one to shy away from a confrontation, had a right Barney with manager Glenn Roeder. He was dropped from the first team, and it looked like his time at Upton Park was up. But fate stepped in. Roeder fell ill, and Trevor Brooking took over as caretaker manager. Di Canio was back in the fold, and wouldn't you know it, he scored an all-important winner against Chelsea in the penultimate game of the season. It gave the Hammers a fighting chance of staying up. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. They were relegated on the last day, despite Di Canio scoring a last-gasp equaliser against Birmingham. Out of contract, Di Canio was a free agent, but he was not quite finished with English football just yet. He signed for Charlton Athletic for the 2003-04 season, ready to prove that he still had plenty to offer. Di Canio's 1 year in Charlton was pretty eventful, to say the least. He did help them achieve their highest league finish since 1953, mind you, ending up 7th place. Still, he could manage no more than 4 league goals, all from the penalty spot, a cheeky Panenka even against Arsenal. He was still making goals for others, and a game-changer nonetheless. Remember that match against Portsmouth? Charlton were 1-0 down at half-time, and on came Di Canio as a sub. Well, this sparked the revival that saw Jonathan Fortune equalise. Then in the dying minutes, Di Canio's corner saw Sean Bartlett head in the winner. But despite signing a contract extension, Di Canio's heart was still in Rome. In August 2004, he made a shock return to Lazio, taking a massive pay cut to help out his struggling boyhood club. The fans were over the moon. Finally, they had a local lad back in the team, and Di Canio didn't disappoint, scoring in the Rome derby just like he did back in '89, and he finished off proceedings with a fascist salute to his Lazio fans. Still, it wasn't all plain sailing. Di Canio's cosy relationship with the Lazio Ultras and the controversies that generally followed him wherever he went didn't exactly endear him to the club president. So, in the summer of 2006, his contract wasn't renewed. Outright fascist, yet not a racist, he had insisted. Well, that was a tough one, wasn't it? It doesn't exactly clear the other. The straight-arm salutes he had given were just identifying himself to fellow Lazio fans, a comrade's salute to his comrades. But not everyone had seen it that way, of course. He tried to clear the air by saying he didn't want to incite a violence or racial hatred, but it was too little too late. His political views outshone his footballing achievements, thus leaving him with a tainted reputation. Boy, did it follow him around. He finally hung up his boots in March 2008, calling time on a 23-year journey that took him from the streets of Rome to the stadiums of England and Scotland. His body had started to groan, and on to the next chapter it was. He signed up for coaching courses at Coverciano, determined to remain in the game he loves and his dream, to manage his beloved West Ham United. He even threw his hat in the ring when Alan Kirbishley resigned in 2008, but it wasn't meant to be. However, he was still immensely close to the Hammers, playing in Tony Carr's testimonial at Upton Park in 2010, even turning out for both sides. West Ham opened the Paolo Di Canio Lounge in the West Stand in a fitting tribute, a permanent reminder of his impact at the club. But it was not without controversy either that Di Canio stirred during the length of his managerial career. In 2010, Di Canio attended the funeral of a senior fascist, Paolo Signorelli, where mourners were photographed making mass fascist salutes towards Signorelli's coffin. Signorelli had been convicted of involvement in the 1980 Bologna massacre, a neo-fascist terrorist attack which killed 85 people and wounded more than 200. It was the managerial debut of Paolo Di Canio at Swindon Town, May 2011, when they were relegated to League Two. A big step down perhaps, but something Di Canio was up for. He got them off to a cracking 3-0 win against Crewe Alexandra. Things were looking good. But then, just a month later, he had a right Barney with the striker Leon Clark right on the pitch. The bloke was never one to shy away from a confrontation, was he? Still, amidst all the controversies, there were flashes of brilliance. In January 2012, Swindon created an upset in the FA Cup, beating the then Premier League team Wigan Athletic. An overjoyed Di Canio dedicated the victory to his father, who sadly had died a few days earlier. They even reached the Football League trophy final that year, though they lost to Chesterfield. But the real prize was promotion to League One, which they won in April 2012. An ecstatic Di Canio dedicated it to his parents, both of whom had died that year. But unfortunately, financial troubles were brewing at Swindon. Di Canio even offered to pay out of his own pocket to keep some loan players at the club. But when the club sold Matt Ritchie behind his back, Di Canio had had enough. He resigned in February 2013. 31st of March 2013, Sunderland appointed him as their new gaffer, and it caused a right stir, I tell you. Some people were unhappy about his political utterances in the past, and their vice-chairman resigned in protest. Even Durham Miners Association were not best pleased and removed one of their banners from the Stadium of Light. But Di Canio had a job to do: keep Sunderland in the Premier League. They were in a right old mess, and he had just a handful of games to try turning things around. His first match saw them defeated by Chelsea, but then came the Tyne-Wear derby against Newcastle. Well, that was one for the memory banks. Sunderland thrashed their fierce rivals 3-0 away from home, their first victory in over a decade at St James's Park. Di Canio himself was going utterly mental on the touchline, as if he had just won the World Cup. Mind you, they did not win their next 3 games, with even a humiliating 6-1 thrashing by Aston Villa. In the end, however, they scrambled through and stayed up by the skin of their teeth. In came the 2013-14 season, and Di Canio knew he had his work cut out for him. He had to work at integrating a whole bunch of new signings while dealing with the loss of some key players. After 5 league games, Sunderland had managed to scrape together a meagre 1 point. Fans were growing restless, pressure was building, and Di Canio's temper was starting to fray. Then came the final straw, a 3-0 defeat to West Brom, and Di Canio was sacked the very next day. Just 13 games into the season, his time at Sunderland was over. The club's chief executive cited complaints from senior players over Di Canio's brutal and vitriolic criticism. Apparently, he'd been laying into the lad something fierce. Di Canio denied it, of course, but the damage was done. There's the fairly controversial Latin word dux on his right bicep, meaning leader, which also happens to be associated with Mussolini's nickname Il Duce. Didn't that get him in some hot water with Sky Sports Italia back in 2016? It sure did, and he's been out of the limelight ever since. Then there is the full back piece featuring fascist imagery, an eagle, fasces, and even a portrait of Mussolini himself. But let's be fair, his political views did him no favours, did they? A pity, really, since the bloke was a proper talent on the pitch. But that's life, innit? Sometimes your off-field carry-on can overshadow your brilliance on it. And that's a wrap for this one. If you're a fan of football icons, stay tuned for more stories of legends on the pitch.
Over Cunningham, Di Canio! I do not believe that! That is sensational, even by his standards.